Have you ever witnessed a moment that changed a life forever? Get out of here now before I call security.
The manager's shrill voice echoed through the Fifth Avenue convenience store, causing all the customers to turn and stare. Jamal Washington, only 10 years old, stood his ground in front of the counter, clutching the hard-earned 20 cents in his small hand. His bare feet contrasted starkly with the shiny marble floor of the most expensive store in Manhattan's upscale neighborhood. "Please, ma'am," his voice trembled, but not from fear, from sheer determination.
My little sister is hungry.
She's only 6 months old, and she won't stop crying.
I just need some powdered milk."
The manager, a middle-aged white woman, looked at the black boy in torn clothes with disgust.
20 cents won't even buy you a stick of gum here, kid. This is a store for real people, not beggars. At that moment, the doorbell rang and Theodore Blackstone, a billionaire real estate mogul, walked in wearing a $3,000 suit.
He had stopped by just to buy some imported water after leaving a meeting where he had just closed a $50 million deal. Jamal turned to the elegant man, his large dark eyes shining with desperate hope.
"Sir, please.
I swear I'll pay you back when I grow up. Every time my grandmother told me about the hard times," she said, "there's always someone with a good heart."
Can you be that person today?" Theodore stopped in the middle of the hallway, annoyed by the interruption. He looked down at the dirty kid who dared to address him directly. "Boy, do you know who I am? I build skyscrapers. I don't give charity to bums."
"I'm not a bum, sir," Jamal replied, maintaining his dignity despite the tears welling up in his eyes.
"My father died in Afghanistan serving this country.
My mother works 3 jobs, but today she collapsed from exhaustion.
I just want my little sister to stop crying. Could this be the start of an incredible turnaround? Stay tuned to Black Voices to find out." Theodore let out a cruel laugh. "What a touching story. Let me guess. Next step is begging for money for an emergency operation." He turned to the manager. "Call security. These people always make up these dramatic stories." Then something extraordinary happened. Jamal didn't lower his head. He didn't run away.
Instead, he stared intently into Theodore's icy blue eyes and said with a serenity that startled everyone present, "You will remember this day for the rest of your life, and when you do, you will understand that you wasted a chance to meet the person who could have changed everything." Theodore furrowed his brow, intrigued in spite of himself. There was something in those childish eyes he couldn't quite figure out, a quiet strength that seemed far too old for a 10-year-old. As security approached to remove Jamal, he held on tightly to his 20 cents and made a promise that would echo for the next 15 years. "I swear I'll pay you back when I grow up." And you'll find out that underestimating someone based on their appearance is the most expensive mistake you can make. If this story of childlike determination and promises that change destinies has piqued your curiosity, subscribe to Black Voices to find out how 20 cents and a seemingly impossible promise turned into the most unexpected turnaround Wall Street has ever seen. Security arrived in seconds. 2 mountains of muscle in black uniforms that looked like they had come out of an action movie. "Come on, kid. Get out," said the biggest one, already reaching out to grab Jamal's arm. "Wait," Theodore raised his hand, a cruel smile forming on his lips.
"Let him stay a little longer. I want to have some fun." He approached Jamal, his Italian shoes shining like mirrors. "You said your father died serving his country. How touching. And your mother works 3 jobs. Let me guess, cleaner, babysitter, and what else? Hot dog vendor."
The other customers in the store began to form a small circle, some discreetly filming with their cell phones. The manager crossed her arms, clearly enjoying the spectacle.
Jamal kept his head up. "My mother is a
night shift nursing technician, works at a clothing store during the day, and cares for the elderly on weekends. She barely sleeps 4 hours a night to support us." "What an inspiring story," Theodore laughed, pulling a $100 bill from his wallet.
"I'll make you a deal.
You get down on your knees right here in front of everyone and apologize for bothering me. Maybe I'll consider giving this bill to your hardworking family." The silence in the store was deafening. Even the security guard seemed uncomfortable with the unnecessary cruelty of the situation.
Jamal looked at the bill, then at the expectant faces around him.
His little sister was at home crying from hunger. His mother had collapsed from exhaustion after working 16 hours straight.
For a moment that seemed like an eternity, Jamal hesitated.
Theodore smiled, thinking he had broken the spirit of this insolent child. See, in the end, everyone has their price.
Then Jamal did something no one expected.
Instead of kneeling, he took a step back and said in a voice that didn't waver once, "My father didn't die so I could kneel before little men."
Theodore's face darkened instantly.
"What did you call me?" "You heard me," Jamal replied, putting his 20 cents in his pocket.
"My father was Sergeant David Washington, 2nd Infantry Division. He taught me that a man is measured by his character, not the size of his bank account.
And from what I can see, you're the poorest man I've ever met." The crowd murmured, some visibly impressed by the boy's courage. Theodore felt his authority being publicly challenged, something he would never tolerate, especially from a 10-year-old kid from the projects.
"You don't know who you're talking to, kid."
Theodore leaned in, his voice low and threatening. "I can destroy your family's life with one phone call." "Where does your mother work?"
"At the Metropolitan Hospital."
"One word from me to the board of directors, and she loses her job tonight."
Jamal felt a chill run down his spine, but he didn't show it.
He had learned early on that predators smell fear and feed on it. "You can try," he said calmly. "But then you'd have to explain why you care so much about a 10-year-old boy who just wanted milk for his sister."
Theodore laughed.
But there was nervousness in his voice.
"No one's going to believe a bomb like you over me."
"Maybe not," Jamal agreed, looking around at the people who were still filming.
"But we live in interesting times, don't we?"
Everyone has a camera in their pocket, and the internet has a long memory.
For the first time since the conversation began, Theodore looked genuinely concerned.
He glanced quickly at the cell phones pointed in their direction, calculating the potential damage.
A viral video of a billionaire humiliating a poor kid could destroy years of image building.
"You stop filming immediately," he yelled at the crowd. But it was too late. At least 5 people had captured the entire interaction.
Jamal watched Theodore's change in behavior with scientific interest.
It was fascinating to see how powerful men turned into cowards the moment their actions faced real consequences. "You know, Mr. Blackstone," Jamal said, pronouncing the name with perfect precision, something that made Theodore realize that the boy had known exactly who he was from the beginning. "I'm really going to pay you back when I grow up, but maybe not in the way you think." As the tension grew in that moment, no one in that elegant setting could have predicted that they were witnessing the first meeting between 2 men who over the next 15 years would become the protagonists of one of the most impressive turnarounds Wall Street had ever seen, where every cruel word spoken that day would become fuel for revenge that would completely redefine the concept of social justice in the United States. What happened after that confrontation in the convenience store was something no one could have predicted, especially Theodore Blackstone. Margaret Patterson, an investigative journalist for the New York Times who was in the store buying coffee, had filmed the entire interaction. At 52, with 3 decades of experience exposing corporate scandals, she immediately recognized the systematic cruelty she had just witnessed.
"Kid," she approached Jamal when he finally left the store, still empty-handed. "What's your name?"
"Jamal Washington," he replied, discreetly wiping his eyes. Even at only 10 years old, he had learned that showing weakness on the street was dangerous.
Margaret opened her wallet and took out $50. "That's enough for milk and diapers for a week. But I want you to promise me one thing.
Never forget that man's name and never let anyone convince you that you're worth less than he is." As Jamal ran home with his groceries, Margaret called her editor. "I need a full background check on Theodore Blackstone. Something tells me today wasn't the first time he stepped on someone for pure pleasure."
Across town, Theodore had already forgotten all about the incident.
For him, humiliating a poor kid had been nothing more than a passing entertainment before his meeting with Japanese investors. What he didn't know was that Margaret Patterson specialized in destroying men just like him. In the days that followed, while Theodore closed million-dollar deals and dined at elite restaurants, Jamal came home from school and took care of his little sister Diamond while his mother Kesha worked double shifts at the hospital.
The one-bedroom apartment in the Bronx was small.
But there was something Theodore could never buy with all his billions. The unconditional love that filled that space. "Son," Kesha said one night as she rocked Diamond to sleep.
Mrs. Patterson called again.
"She wants to know if you'd like to participate in a tutoring program for gifted children."
Jamal looked at his mother in surprise. "Gifted?"
She said she talked to his teachers. "Apparently, his IQ is in the top 5% in the country."
Kesha smiled proudly. "Your father always said you had something special in your head."
What Margaret had discovered about Theodore during her investigations was disturbing.
3 sexual harassment lawsuits settled out of court.
Dozens of families evicted from properties he bought below market value through questionable tactics. A consistent pattern of abuse of power that spanned decades. But what struck Margaret most was discovering that Theodore had used political connections to prevent a public school from being built in the Bronx because it would have decreased the value of his properties in the area. Hundreds of children like Jamal were forced to attend overcrowded schools because of the greed of a man who would never notice a few $1 million missing from his bank account. "Mom," Jamal said one night as he studied advanced math with books Margaret had sent him.
"Can I ask you a weird question?"
"Sure, baby." If someone does something really wrong to a lot of people, but they have enough money to never get punished, does that mean they'll always get away with it?
Kesha stopped folding clothes and looked at her son.
There was an intensity in his eyes that worried her, not because it was dangerous, but because it was too mature for a 10-year-old.
"Why are you asking that?"
"Just curious." Jamal went back to his studies, but Kesha noticed that he had started writing things down in a special notebook he kept hidden under his mattress. Meanwhile, Theodore continued his privileged life, completely oblivious to the fact that his actions in that store had planted a seed that would grow in unimaginable ways. At his business dinners, he would occasionally tell the story of the pretentious kid he had put in his place,
always eliciting laughter from the other billionaires present.
"You should have seen the look on his face when I offered him $100 to kneel down," Theodore laughed, toasting with $3,000 champagne. "These kids from the suburbs need to learn early on where they belong in the world." What he didn't know was that this moment would come back to haunt him. Keep watching Black Voices to see the stunning conclusion. What Theodore couldn't imagine was that Margaret Patterson had documented not only his cruelty to Jamal, but also these subsequent conversations through sources within his social circle. Every arrogant comment, every display of contempt for human dignity, everything was being carefully catalogued. Jamal, meanwhile, had discovered something fascinating at the public library. After researching Theodore Blackstone, he found articles about other businessmen who had been exposed for corruption and abuse of power. He studied each case meticulously, analyzing how they had been brought down, what evidence had been used, what their weaknesses were. "Interesting," he muttered to himself as he read about a billionaire who lost everything after compromising emails were leaked.
Powerful men always make the same mistakes.
They think they're untouchable. In the notebook hidden under his mattress, Jamal began writing what he called Project Justice. It wasn't a childish plan for revenge. It was something much more sophisticated, a strategic analysis of how a poor boy could eventually bring down an empire built on cruelty and corruption. Margaret visited the Washington family regularly, always bringing books and educational opportunities for Jamal. On one of these visits, she noticed the notebook, truncated 1342 characters, had ever seen. A plan that would take exactly 15 years to complete and that would transform a humiliated boy in a convenience store into the most powerful man in Manhattan.
And Theodore Blackstone.
He continued to toast at expensive dinners, telling his story about putting a kid in her place with no idea that every arrogant laugh was sealing his own fate. 15 years later, the Blackstone building on Park Avenue was bustling with frenetic activity. Theodore, now 60 years old and completely gray-haired, watched nervously from the window of his office on the 50th floor. In recent weeks, strange rumors have been circulating through the corridors of Wall Street about a federal investigation involving his real estate operations. Mr. Blackstone, his secretary, appeared at the door, visibly shaken.
"The FBI is here.
They have search and seizure warrants." Theodore felt the blood drain from his face.
What do you mean? For what?
Before she could answer, 3 federal agents enter the office, followed by a figure who made Theodore stumble over his words. A 25-year-old black man impeccably dressed in a navy blue suit, carrying a leather briefcase and wearing a smile that Theodore recognized instantly.
Mr. Blackstone, the young man said, extending his hand. Jamal Washington, federal prosecutor specializing in financial crimes. I believe we've met.
Theodore stared into those same determined eyes he had seen 15 years earlier in a convenience store. His mind raced, trying to process the impossibility of the situation.
You're that kid who promised to pay you back when he grew up. Jamal finished calmly. Well, Mr. Blackstone, it's time to pay up.
The agents began confiscating computers, documents, and files as Jamal opened his briefcase, revealing an impressive stack of meticulously organized evidence. For the past 15 years, I've studied your company's every move, every offshore account, every bribe to city council members, every family illegally evicted from properties you bought below market value through intimidation.
Jamal took a tablet out of his briefcase. But what really impresses me is your arrogance. Do you know how many times you've told that convenience store story at recorded dinners? Theodore paled. 63 times in the last 15 years to be exact. Always laughing about how you put a pretentious kid in his place. Jamal tapped the screen and Theodore's unmistakable voice echoed through the office.
These kids from the suburbs need to learn early on where their place is in the world. Margaret Patterson from Investigative Journalism has been very helpful in documenting your philosophical expansions over the years.
Oh, she's fine, in case you're wondering.
In fact, she's covering his arrest live for the New York Times. Theodore staggered back to his chair, the weight of realization hitting him like an avalanche.
That's impossible. You were a kid begging for change. A child? Yes. Begging? No. Jamal approached the window, watching the crowd of reporters gathering at the entrance to the building.
I was begging for a chance to prove that dignity doesn't depend on a bank account, that intelligence has no color, and that underestimating someone based on their appearance is the most expensive mistake a man can make.
One of the federal agents approached. Mr. Washington, we found the files you mentioned. Cayman Island accounts, forged contracts, it's all here.
Theodore stood up abruptly, trying to regain some control of the situation. My lawyers will destroy you. I have connections in Washington, in Albany, everywhere that matters.
Jamal smiled, pulling another document about your connections.
Senator Morrison, who always approved your projects, arrested yesterday for accepting bribes. Judge Hartwell, who dismissed cases against your companies under federal investigation. Mayor Davidson, who facilitated your evictions, just resigned.
The color drained completely from Theodore's face. How did you 15 years, Mr. Blackstone?
15 years studying law at Harvard on a full scholarship, specializing in the very crimes you commit. 15 years building a network of allies in the justice system, in journalism, in the federal government. While you were toasting at expensive dinners, telling how you humiliated a child, I was preparing for this very moment.
Theodore's phone rang incessantly.
Within minutes, his stock plummeted 40% on the stock market.
Investors canceled contracts and banks froze corporate accounts. My family, Theodore muttered. Reality finally sinking in. My reputation, my business.
Your family will find out that the house they live in was built with money stolen from working families. Your reputation will reveal that behind the philanthropist was a financial predator. Your businesses will show that they prospered at the expense of thousands of people.
Jamal closed the folder and looked Theodore straight in the eye. But I want you to understand one thing. I'm not doing this out of personal revenge.
I'm doing this for all the families you destroyed, for all the children who went hungry because you illegally raised rents. For all the dreams you crushed in the name of profit. Theodore collapsed into his chair, his shoulders shaking.
You were just a kid. How could you have planned all this? Because that kid learned something important that day, Jamal replied, heading for the door. He learned that men like you only have power over those who accept being victims. And I decided 15 years ago that I would never be a victim again. As the handcuffs were placed on Theodore's wrists, Jamal made a phone call. "Mom, it's me. Turn on the TV.
I just fulfilled that promise I made when I was 10 years old." On the other end of the line, Kesha's emotional voice echoed.
"My son, your father would be so proud."
Theodore was led through the hallways he had once commanded with absolute authority, passing employees who avoided his gaze.
In the elevator, he muttered to Jamal, "20 cents.
All this for 20 cents worth of milk."
"No, Mr. Blackstone," Jamal replied calmly. "All this for 15 years of dignity that you tried to steal from me in a single moment. The difference is that I invested my pain in education, determination, and justice.
You invested your arrogance in cruelty, corruption, and contempt." When the elevator doors opened on the ground floor, a crowd of reporters exploded in flashes and questions. Theodore covered his face, but Jamal walked confidently toward the cameras. "Justice has no age, color, or social class," he declared into the microphones.
"It only has patience and preparation." Today, a promise made by a 10-year-old boy has finally been fulfilled.
As Theodore was placed in the federal vehicle, one question remained.
Was it possible that the child humiliated 15 years earlier had orchestrated not only the downfall of a corrupt billionaire, but a complete overhaul of the system that allowed men like Theodore to thrive at the expense of the most vulnerable? 3 years. After Theodore Blackstone's arrest, New York City was undergoing a transformation that no one could have predicted. The building that once bore the name Blackstone Tower, now displayed in gold letters, Jamal Washington Social Justice Center.
Jamal, now 28, watched from the window of his new office on the 50th floor.
Ironically, the same floor where Theodore had once reigned with utter arrogance.
The difference was that this space no longer served to feed one man's greed, but to provide free legal assistance to low-income families. Mr. Washington, his assistant, appeared at the door.
"The CNN crew has arrived for the 3-year special interview." Jamal smiled, adjusting his tie.
Over the past 3 years, he had become one of the most respected figures in the country in the fight against financial crime. His investigative methods developed since he was 10 years old had resulted in the arrest of 17 other corrupt billionaires and the recovery of more than $2 billion in stolen funds. Meanwhile, in a federal prison in New York State, Theodore Blackstone woke up in his 2x3 cell, staring at the peeling ceiling that had replaced his panoramic view of Manhattan. At 63, his hair completely white and 20 pounds thinner, he spent his days trying to process how a 10-year-old had orchestrated the complete destruction of his empire. His wife had filed for divorce 6 months after his arrest, taking half of the few assets that had not been confiscated by the government. His children had changed their last name and refused to visit him. The mansions, yachts, and bank accounts, everything had evaporated as if it had never existed.
During the interview, the host asked Jamal, "How does it feel to know that the man who tried to humiliate you is now serving a 25-year sentence?"
"I don't feel satisfaction at his suffering," Jamal replied calmly. "I feel satisfaction for the 400 families we were able to help get their homes back through the investigations we started. I feel satisfaction for the 50,000 children who now have access to quality education through programs funded with the money recovered from corruption." The camera captured Margaret Patterson, now director of investigative journalism at the New York Times, sitting in the front row of the auditorium. She had become not only the mentor who guided Jamal through Harvard, but also the investigative partner who documented every step of his extraordinary journey. "The most ironic thing," Jamal continued, "is that Theodore Blackstone inadvertently created the movement he feared most. His cruelty to a 10-year-old boy not only destroyed his own legacy, but inspired a new generation of prosecutors specializing in crimes against vulnerable communities." In the penitentiary, Theodore watched the interview in the common room, surrounded by other inmates who ignored him completely. 3 years ago, he was one of the most powerful people in America. Today, he was just another number in an orange uniform whose only relevance was to serve as an example of what happens when abuse of power meets true justice.
The presenter asked the question everyone was waiting for. "That promise you made at age 10.
I swear I'll pay you back when I grow up.
Has she been fulfilled?" Jamal laughed softly.
"Not only has it been fulfilled, it has been multiplied. Those 20 cents he rejected have turned into $2 billion recovered for entire communities. That kid he tried to humiliate became the voice of thousands of families who never had anyone to fight for them. During the commercial break, Jamal received a call from his mother, Kesha, now the director of nursing at the largest public hospital in the Bronx, a position she earned after completing her degree, which was funded entirely by the foundation Jamal had created. "Son, your sister Diamond got a perfect score on her SAT. She wants to follow in your footsteps and study law." Jamal smiled, remembering the 6-month-old baby who cried from hunger 15 years earlier. Now, Diamond Washington was one of the brightest students at her elite prep school, determined to continue the legacy of justice. Her brother had started. When the interview aired that night, social media exploded with messages of support. #ProMesa became a worldwide trending topic with thousands of people sharing their own stories of overcoming adversity and determination.
Theodore, watching alone in his cell, finally understood the magnitude of his mistake.
He hadn't just been cruel to a child. He had underestimated the transformative power of injustice when directed toward the right purpose. That 10-year-old boy had not only kept his promise, he had completely redefined the concept of reciprocity. At the end of the interview, Jamal was asked about his future plans.
"I'm considering running for Senate," he revealed.
"Because structural change requires a presence in the structures of power, and unlike some, I intend to use that presence to serve, not to serve myself."
3 months later, Jamal Washington officially announced his candidacy for the U.S. Senate.
His campaign was funded entirely by small donations from working families, many of whom had benefited from his investigations over the years. Theodore, who had once controlled senators with bribes and blackmail, watched on the news from prison as the child he had despised rose to the highest political power in the country, carried by the genuine gratitude of millions of people. The promise of 20 cents had turned into something much bigger than money or revenge. It had become a social justice movement that would span generations. Jamal Washington had proven that the best way to pay someone who tries to destroy your dreams is to build a reality where such people become completely irrelevant.
He turned humiliation into education, anger into determination, and a childhood promise into the foundation of a legacy that would forever change the way America treats its most vulnerable citizens.
If this story of transformation and justice has touched your heart, subscribe to Black Voices for more stories that prove that true revenge isn't destroying those who hurt you, but building something so great that they become just a footnote in your success story.